my colleague, Jonathan Adler from Health Story Collaborative. And we're going to keep it really brief because we're excited to get to the heart of the program, which is to hear from Brett and Emmett and hear their amazing stories. But just for the sake of context, we wanted to give you a few minutes of background. So I myself am a physician. I work at Mass General in internal medicine. I'm also a patient. I've been living with multiple sclerosis since 2001. And Health Story Collaborative really grew out of my lived experience navigating healthcare both as a patient and as a healthcare provider. And really I'd say more as a patient, learning that when we have a life-changing event, whether that's getting a diagnosis of a chronic illness or having a trauma of any sort, we have to shift our stories and integrate that event into our lives. And how do we do that? So that's how I came to storytelling as something that really helped me to move forward in my life and motivated me ultimately to start an organization to help other individuals who are navigating such challenges to move forward and to use storytelling as a tool to do that. So stories, it really grew out of my sense of what feels broken in the healthcare system today, which is the short version, not enough time and space for quality relationship building, for listening, for storytelling, for connecting. And so really our main goal at Health Story Collaborative is to deliberately create space for that sharing. And so it's healing for both the storytellers and for the listeners too. And I think that the stories really transcend the healthcare issue and really are a way for all of us to connect in this world where there's a lot of divisiveness and to really remember our shared humanity. So I'll stop there for a second, pass it to John so he can say a bit, and then I'll tell you a bit more about how things will run tonight.
Hi everyone, it is such an honor to be with you here tonight. Thank you so much for inviting us. So I'm Jonathan Adler. I'm a clinical psychologist and a psychology professor. My research focuses on the ways in which we develop a sense of self by telling the stories of our lives. And for the last 5 or 6 years, I've been working explicitly with folks who acquire some kind of major physical disability in adulthood and how our identity continues to develop in light of that. So it's really, really a pleasure to be here with all of you. If anyone here wants to share your story as part of the research program, just send me an email. As Annie said, the process of telling your story is healing, but the process of receiving someone else's story is also healing. So actually all of you have a really important role here tonight. The work that Annie and I do is grounded in the robust, thriving science of narrative and its relationship with well-being, but you won't see any of that science on stage tonight. We're really here to foreground people's individual stories. But you play a really important role in that. Stories don't exist in a vacuum. They exist in the world. They exist between people. They are what knit us together as individuals and weave us together as communities. And so we're so delighted to have you participate with us tonight in this, what we call a healing story session.
Thank you. So I want to say thank you, first of all, to SCI Boston for having us. I'm really listening and in awe of what you all do, and it really is so grounded in stories, like thinking about the peer mentorship program that's hearing people's stories and really helping people to feel more connected and less alone. So we're really excited to hear these two wonderful storytellers tonight, and I will say that it is a gift to all of us that they're giving us. It's not easy what they have gone through, this process of really digging into their stories and working on them and writing them. It takes a lot of engagement and energy and emotional processing. So it's really a gift to all of us, and we're excited to share that with you. So how we're going to run tonight is we're going to first hear from Brett, and then we're going to transition immediately to our second storyteller, Emmett, and then we'll all come back up at the end and have a little bit of time for Q&A if time allows. So your job, audience, is really, as John said, to open yourself up to this experience and to recognize that you are a part of this, that when Brett and Emmett share their story with you, how you receive it will shape their stories going forward, and how you receive it will shape your stories going forward, and we're all in this web of stories. And so I encourage you just to open yourself up and to think about what resonates. Whether you have a spinal cord injury or not, we have all faced challenges, and there will be a lot of themes that resonate. And so just be present, remember what a gift these storytellers are giving to us, and that is all. Here from Emmett. Brett, that was amazing. Thank you.
So they raise it up and taller than Brett. I'm not vertically challenged like that, sure. I'm a 4'6" man. Thanks everybody for coming today, and thanks Brett for that great story. Inspirational, fantastic. I'm just going to jump right in. I grew up in a small town in central Connecticut with a family that loved the outdoors. In the early years of my development, we spent our free time traveling, backpacking, camping, and exploring the world around us. When I was 13 years old, my Boy Scout troop scheduled a day of rock climbing at a nearby cliff. In all honesty, just a large glacial erratic boulder in the woods. It was my first time climbing a rock and using rope systems for safety. I was tentative at first, but as I began to climb, I realized it felt natural to me, like something that was predestined to be a part of my life. I spent the day climbing around on the moderate terrain, certainly not doing anything that would be considered legitimate rock climbing to a serious adventurer. But at the time, it felt like an opening chapter of a book that was entirely new to me, and it drew me in. Seeing a photograph of my young self from that day, I'm now aware of just how easy the challenge was, and how utterly silly I looked, with poor form, laughable equipment, and little to no inherent skill. But the smile pasted across my face showcased a newfound love of the sport. I still remember the feel of rock touching my fingertips, my shoes edging to support my body weight, and small ledges and cracks, and the thrill of waiting the fixed rope as I leaned back to rappel down the rock face for the very first time. Many years later, my path had turned away from climbing as I had moved to Boston and prioritized other things, like furthering my education and career, fixing cars and motorcycles, and even playing golf, which is a sport about as far away from climbing as you can get. While I was at a posh training program in Miami one day, my best friend Pat called out of the blue and asked if I'd like to take a rock climbing class with him. Little did I realize at the time that he'd stirred a long-dormant but ever-present passion deep within me. Together, we became engrossed in climbing and the climbing community, and we both knew it would remain with us for life. Still, other priorities continued to guide my path. I was pursuing a career in business as I worked diligently to pay off grad school loans. And I moved to Washington, D.C., following a beautiful and brilliant girl that I'd fallen deeply in love with. However, it wasn't long before I found myself in someone else's city, abandoned with a shattered heart. I fell into a terrible depression, far from friends and family. It's strange to reflect that now, years later, and after a life-changing injury, this remains the most painful loss of my life. Pat and other climbing friends from my prior life in Boston desperately supported me across time and distance as loneliness threatened to consume me. One August weekend, two very close friends, a couple named Alyssa and John, invited me up to one of our favorite climbing areas in the New York Catskill region. This wasn't unusual, as we came to this climbing mecca regularly, given its similar distance from our two cities. This time, however, they secretly invited Lauren, a girl I'd never met, in hopes that we might connect with each other. I climbed that weekend with John, and Lauren climbed with Alyssa. The cliff extends for miles through the forest, with thousands of established climbing routes. So when we bumped into each other at the base of a route that was well away from the most popular areas, it was undoubtedly an orchestrated encounter. Lauren's eyes caught mine with a shy smile, and I smiled back, feeling an immediate spark of attraction. We exchanged pleasantries, and then John and I carried on down the trail. Once out of earshot, John nudged me with a grin and asked, "She has a great racket, doesn't she?" The double entendre referred to the rack of climbing equipment that Lauren carried on as she prepared to lead Alyssa up their next objective, and it was indeed nice. But the crass and uncharacteristic joke from my straight-laced friend left us both laughing like teenagers. Lauren and I chatted at length during a group dinner that night and quickly made plans for a climbing date a couple of weeks later. My friend's gambit worked, and I soon found myself smitten once more, eagerly searching for an avenue to leave my painful memories in Washington for another new beginning in Boston with Lauren. Within a few months, I convinced my employer to let me work remotely, still a rare feat in those pre-pandemic times. It wasn't long before we were living together, surrounded by friends and the climbing community that we both loved so much. 3 years later, Alyssa, John, Lauren, and I had grown inseparable, and we climbed together all over the world. We decided to plan something new for the warm summer solstice of 2018 and set our sights on an unexplored region of the Alaska range of mountains. We'd spent years honing our skills in established climbing areas where guidebooks described all of the difficulties and solutions to well-trodden routes up rock faces, and in familiar mountain ranges teeming with tourist hikers following trail markers toward known summits and vistas. We felt it was time to take a step into the realm of exploration, a pursuit that's slowly disappearing from the toolbox of many mountaineers as more and more of the world's finite hidden wilderness areas are explored. Our plan was to find an inspiring mountain that no person had ever climbed or seen before, and establish a new route to the top. A close friend and climbing mentor of ours had built his young climbing career doing expeditions like this throughout Alaska in the 1960s and 70s, and he helped us plan for the inevitable hardships we would face. Following months of preparation, a tiny bush plane dropped us off 2 at a time on a narrow gravel strip in the middle of an uncharted river deep in the subrange aptly called the Hidden Mountains of Lake Clark National Park. We portaged hundreds of pounds of food and equipment through thick groves of alders and underbrush, following the river toward its glacial origin and a line of distant jagged peaks erupting from the earth. After several days of thrashing through unforgiving terrain, we discovered a small glacier ringed by a cirque of stone towers that we surveyed together for promising climbing routes. We settled on our target, a twin-spired peak we dubbed Mount Sorrel. After hunkering down for 2 days in camp to wait out unpredictable Alaska storms, we awoke to promising weather and gathered up our equipment. We snowshoed across the glacier to the cliff base and began to climb by 2 different routes, both couples venturing into the unknown. I remember feeling utter euphoria as I quested up through virgin rock with no knowledge of what awaited me above, finding my own way in a manner I've never done before. I was finally blending the physical challenge of rock climbing with the heightened mental challenge of unlocking a puzzle to find the best solution. It was the happiest day of climbing I ever experienced. Unfortunately, this is where memory fails me. Sometime late in the day, about 2/3 of the way up the cliff, the objective hazard that always looms in the mountains came for me. I was struck by falling rock, either let loose by the sun's warming rays on frozen terrain far above me, or perhaps pulled down by my own negligence as I climbed. We think the rock snapped my head back, slamming my rigid foam helmet into the back of my neck, and partially severing my spinal cord at the C6 vertebra. What followed was an extraordinary rescue by my close friends, as well as a unit of elite military parajumpers that navigated a Pave-Hawk helicopter at breakneck speed, hundreds of miles from Anchorage and through the unfamiliar mountain range. Several weeks later, I woke from a deep and bizarre dream state that I later learned was an induced coma to find myself in the ICU at Providence Hospital in Anchorage. The rockfall had caused a traumatic brain injury, and the coma was my best chance of avoiding total loss of higher function following brain surgery. Over the ensuing weeks, I was visited almost constantly by my climbing team, Pat and his family, who had flown up from Rhode Island, and many members of my family from Connecticut and nearby Juneau. They had all rushed to Anchorage when my neurosurgeon advised them to get there as quickly as possible so that they could say goodbye. I proved to be luckier than he expected and survived to discover a new life and different type of life. As the fog gently lifted, it was hard to differentiate between the strange sea of dreams my mind invented to conceal its inability to grapple with the trauma and the new unfamiliar reality that I was waking to. The sterile intensive care setting, the unknown faces of my medical team, and unfamiliar detachment between my mind and body left the real world feeling as distant as the dream world I'd been inhabiting for weeks. First 2 years with a spinal cord injury, I felt like a very different person. And at times it seemed as though my very humanity had been stripped away. I felt weak, confused, and entirely dependent on others. Following 12 weeks of rehab at Spalding, where my extensive injuries kept me from making significant progress, Lauren and I moved to an apartment across the street from the facility. I enrolled in an aggressive regimen of outpatient therapy, but still made little progress. Meanwhile, in my confused state, I failed to see the warning signs of a pressure sore developing, and in less than a year after my accident, found myself bedridden for months, preceding and following flap surgery to repair the damage. For Lauren, the emotional trauma of the accident itself, the unrelenting difficulty of having to care for me with painfully little reciprocity weighed heavily, and eventually it broke her spirit. She left in a gloomy cloud of mutual sadness. It felt like those early years were marked by an endless series of similar scares and setbacks. It was difficult to see a path forward. But there were glimmers of hope. Shortly after recovering from the pressure sore, I got a hand cycle and was thrilled to rediscover joy in exercise, movement, and the social engagement it gave me. Nine months later, I took possession of a manual wheelchair, which we thought during my stay at Spalding I'd never be able to operate. I immediately felt comfortable in the new chair and came to prefer its raw simplicity to the impressive technology of the power chair. It felt more like an extension of my body and offered a more direct connection with my surroundings, similar to the way that tight-fitting climbing shoes used to transform intimidating cliffs of stone into inviting playgrounds where I felt most alive. I'm only now starting to appreciate how much that direct connection has always mattered to me. When the COVID-19 pandemic struck in early 2020, my day-to-day existence was still enabled only by the support of caregivers that came in the morning and evening to help me with activities I was unable to do for myself. Most important among these were tasks like managing my bowel and bladder, showering, hurrying to and from bed, and getting dressed. I had 3 caregivers on a rotating schedule, but one by one they fell ill and dropped out of service. One morning, I got the dreaded phone call from my last remaining caregiver telling me that she didn't feel well and was not coming to work. I was trapped in bed, a catastrophe I'd hoped would never come. Terrified, I called my sister in Connecticut, and she drove 2.5 hours to perform the caretaker role that morning. She then told me flatly that we were going to pack my bags and I was moving in with her and my 3 nieces for the foreseeable future. At that moment, I saw one thing with perfect clarity. My single most important objective was to find a way to live independently without requiring another person to drop everything and care for me. I wanted to make sure I never again felt so exposed and vulnerable. Since that morning 3 years ago, I've invested all my effort into reducing my dependence on others. I tell myself that this will mean I can once again play the simple role of friend, brother, or son, rather than patient. And I'm plagued by the memory of being stuck in bed without the ability to rescue myself, like a formative childhood trauma that haunts me years later. My journey has taken me to rehab centers across the country to learn new skills, through medical procedures to simplify my care needs, and into several housing arrangements where I experimented with ideas on how to adapt my environment to my disability. I solved one small challenge at a time, and I'm fortunate that the unique characteristics of my injury have allowed me to achieve real independence, and with it, the confidence that I won't again feel trapped or abandoned. The sad irony is that by working so hard to achieve self-reliance and protect myself from being abandoned again, I know in some ways I pushed away others when they just wanted to help. A mental survey of my fellow quads throughout this community leaves me awestruck by how others have managed to emerge from their injuries, lead successful careers, start families and raise children, and give back to the disability community with endless commitment to mentorship and fellowship, all of them ways that I've fallen behind. Our injuries force us to be selective in how we invest our time. Zealous pursuit of one goal means profound trade-offs in others. No one can do it all. I wonder how I'll feel about the path I chose when I look back years from now. These 5 years have also exposed for me a hidden truth about spinal cord injuries. While we're capable of remarkable adaptation to solve complex challenges, we're inevitably caught off guard by new and unexpected complications that often prove more difficult than the paralysis itself. In my case, it's a condition called heterotopic ossification. A massive bone structure has grown to encapsulate my hip joint, distorting it in a painful way that reduces my function and disrupts the nearby organs. It's a poorly understood condition that leaves even knowledgeable clinicians with little to no appreciation for the challenges it has created. And it's hard to blame them. There are only subtle indications to an observer that the torque on my skeletal structure twists me violently sideways and prevents me from lifting myself during transfers. That the constant pain emanating from the hip causes intense tone and spasms from my fingertips to my toes, and that the dysfunction of my digestive system due to unwelcome bone constricting it has warped my once healthy diet into a limited palette of liquids and a few heavily processed foods. The limitations imposed on my body have meaningfully changed how I live my life, how I view my surroundings, and how I make use of scarce resources like time and energy. Still, I see within myself a familiar spark, the core of a person that remains undamaged and unrestrained by the physical changes around it. I will never again get to climb unknown cliffs and uncharted locations. The spirit of exploration and adaptation persists, as do my most valued friendships. I'm buoyed with confidence gleaned from the successes I've enjoyed over the past several years. I've realized that while this disability is restrictive and unforgiving, we can still learn to live our best lives with it. By forcing us to consider what matters most, it can actually help us to focus on priorities that we might otherwise have neglected. There's no cure for spinal cord injury, and strictly speaking, there's no recovery from it. But this is not a terminal condition, and it's one that can teach us to find new sources of strength and discovery. I hope that I and all my fellow members of the SCI community continue to look beyond our scares and setbacks and unlock new routes to climb through this unknown terrain and reach the beautiful summits of our own hidden mountains.
Thank you so much, Emmett. So, Brett, come on back up. We usually like to start after the storytelling by letting the storytellers see if they have anything they want to say to each other. There are clearly resonances between their stories, but they haven't heard each other's stories. So we thought we'd hand over the mic to you and just see if there's anything you wanted to say to each other.
Well, that was incredibly inspiring, and I can see we share a lot other than the chair. This has been a great experience, and I want to thank everyone who made it happen. I want to thank Heidi and Strada and Braxton who get to speak. I was a little weird at first, but especially when she told me it'd be like 150 people or more. But I'm glad I did it, and I appreciate you all.
I like this one. I'm going to have to use my hands. Put them on no hands. Yeah, Brett, your talk. I know we took slightly different tones in the way we addressed this. I think most of my friends would say I'm usually the one who tends to be a smart ass and class clown in situations like this, but I took the opportunity just to take a slightly more melodramatic approach to the little thing that happened to me. I really appreciate your story. What I appreciate more than anything is how you've so quickly re-engaged with life, re-engaged with your family, taken on this disability and just made it your thing. Made it something that you are willing, able to live with, and probably use the best way you possibly can to make the most for you and your family. So thank you for setting that example for all of us.
Can you hear me? Yeah, sorry. So we probably don't have a ton of time, I think, but if there's any, we'll take maybe one or two questions, comments from anyone out there. And also really encourage you if you want to write on those comment cards. But if anyone has something that they want to say or a question to ask to our storytellers, this is your moment.
Good.
All right, well, write it down then. I just want to say, and I know I speak for Don in this, that it's really been our privilege to work with these two amazing men, and we've learned a lot. So, and thank you for welcoming us into this event and for giving us the opportunity to learn about your amazing organization. So I'm really inspired, and thank you both so much. And we're going to hand it off to whoever's next.
If I may, a brilliant alpinist and writer, Michael Wacher, recently wrote a book about the dramatic rescue. He threw a few copies my way. He meant to bring quite a few more when I told him I was speaking at this event. But unfortunately, he was late for a flight to Alaska with his wife. They're going up there to do some mountaineering, as they should. So I've got about 10 books if anybody is interested in reading about the rescue. It was pretty awesome. I owe an awful lot to an awful lot of people.
Great.